pictures that are taking place with the bombings at night, with the bombings during the daytime, bombing television stations, bombing like 1,000-year-old shrines and whatnot. From my point of view, and I want to get your take on this, it seems that murder is the point. And what I mean by murder is the point that Israel right now, Amos Hochstein is bringing a letter apparently from Netanyahu or the Netanyahu government that is demanding what is effectively a surrender. They want the ability to be able to control southern Lebanon, including running military exercises and having control of the airspace. And of course, they're doing the killing and the bombing with this notion of we will continue murdering and killing indiscriminately unless you sign this document of surrender. How do you see it? I guess the first question is there any chance? Well, first question is who is it aimed at? Is this aimed at the Lebanese government, trying to get the Lebanese government to sign this document? And the reason I ask that is because the Lebanese government hasn't fired a shot in anger. Hezbollah has been the one that has been defending the country. So who is this aimed at? And is there any chance for Lebanon to even sign this document?
It's aimed at the Lebanese people, as you're saying, at the Lebanese government, at the officials. It's aimed at it's a threat. This is exactly what it is. It's a threat. It is not a ceasefire deal because what we're seeing happen in Lebanon, a UN member state, a member of the Arab League, is exactly what's been happening in Gaza. It's the same script down to you must have seen the 3D render that the Israeli army released a few days ago about a Hezbollah bunker underneath a hospital, which holds billions of dollars and gold bars and who knows what else, and has a little Hezbollah flag hanging on one of the walls. That's what they did with Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza before they decimated it. They destroyed it. They razed it to the ground. And there was nothing underneath. It's a lie. So this is, again, the same, down to now this, ceasefire threat. Not a ceasefire, just like what they want is for the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army to all of a sudden, I guess, start fighting their war for them, kind of sandwich Hezbollah, I guess, in the south. Because Israel has made so little gains in South Lebanon, as you're saying, they in the middle of the day without warning, bombing the entrance of Lebanon's largest public hospital, or what happened yesterday in the historic city of Tyre, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the entirety of the city getting carpet bombed. It's despite all of this, Israel hasn't actually made any gains on the ground. Like in Gaza, right? The history repeats itself. In Gaza, the Palestinian resistance is still fighting. They're still reconstituting themselves. They're not close to being defeated. Hezbollah is a much larger force that is fighting at this moment guerrilla tactics in the south, and that is, dealing heavy damage to the Israelis. Yesterday, Hezbollah said that they have killed at least 70 Israeli soldiers, injured over 600, destroyed like 30 Merkava tanks. They haven't been able to do really anything in the South Israel despite getting their asses kicked. So they do what they do on the sky, right? Which is destroy buildings, bomb hospitals, destroy entire cities that they know they will never be able to steal, because this is land theft in the end, right? This is about land theft. As you're saying, the proposal that Amos Hochstein has, it's, they want Lebanon to give them the South, right? Here you go. Here's the South of our country for your settler colonial state that is committing genocide, that is responsible for a new Holocaust that is being live streamed to our phones every single day. So what is the likelihood of it happening? I wouldn't put it at 100% negative. I would put it at 99% negative that it would happen, because you don't know how bad it can get. We don't know how bad it can actually get here, because Hezbollah is not fighting against Israel alone. This is not Israel versus Hezbollah. This is Hezbollah versus Israel, the United States, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Germany, like one of the biggest sponsors of this war and this genocide. So if Hezbollah, like Hamas, at the end of this survives, it's going to be a victory. it is going to be a victory, because this is a war, and this is asymmetric warfare. This is not, a Russia against Ukraine. This is a completely different thing.
But I guess, okay, that's fair. I totally understand that. And you're right. This is, Israel is getting weapons, money, political support, all of this stuff, intelligence from the United States and all of these kind of global actors in the West. And you're also right. If things get too bad, the Lebanese government may be incentivized or terrorized in order to accept a deal like that. But what is the point of a deal? Like, is the point of that deal, if the Lebanese government accepted that deal, then the Lebanese government would be at odds with Hezbollah, meaning the government would be at odds with itself, because Hezbollah makes like a third of the government of Lebanon. How does that work? Is the objective to try to force or to incentivize a civil war in the country? It, what are the chances of that?
Again, I wouldn't put it at completely impossible, because the pressure that is being waged, not just militarily, but through the media channels, like the pro-US, that essentially Zionist Lebanese media that exists, that justifies attacks against civilians, and tries to inflame the street. Right now, I saw earlier that if the war continues, this is gonna cost Lebanon 9% of its GDP. Lebanon, a country that since 2019 has been living the worst worst economic crisis of the modern era. That had, like, I don't know if maybe, like, I remember. And by the way, about what happened to Sputnik Radio is a complete shame. But I remember once I talked to you, I think we talked about when the depositors were going into the banks in Lebanon, with weapons or with gasoline cans, to threaten the people at the banks just to get their deposits back, right? The deposits that the banks froze and stole and took away. This is Lebanon, right? Like, Lebanon is a country that is just living crisis after crisis, the port explosion. So it's a country that also, has like a huge refugee population from Palestine, from Syria. So there's many sides that you can pull the strings, and you cannot tell at which one is going to be the one that breaks. But I do think it's very unlikely, at the very least, in the near future, or in the mid length future, to see the government kind of give in to this, impose a president on Lebanon, impose their president on Lebanon, pick a president for Lebanon. But to do that, they need to have parliament meet. And to have parliament meet, you need to have guarantees, because, as you're saying, Hezbollah is also a political party. It represents a large portion of the population. It's part of the largest bloc in parliament. So if they want the votes, they need to give guarantees to these lawmakers to go to parliament and not be assassinated. And that does not exist. That does not exist at this moment. So, short of a military coup, which the Lebanese army it doesn't have the capability of doing this at all. It's not going to happen, right? Right now, Hezbollah is the most powerful actor because of its weapons, because of its fighters, because of its political representation as well. And also, at this point, it's not Hezbollah that is killing Lebanese men, women, and children. It's Israel with U.S. weapons. So you can never get away from that. You can have Amos Hochstein and Anthony Blinken do all of the tours of the region that you want, but you're not going to get away from reality.
One of the interesting, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you mentioned that. Because what they seem to be trying to do is to try to say, this is Hezbollah's fault. I know that it's Israel that's bombing you, but it's Hezbollah's fault. You got to blame Hezbollah. I mean, keep in mind, they did that the entire war. Like, meaning, when the United States talks about this stuff, it's always dishonest. It all started on October 7th. Israel was just standing there being a moral apartheid state and, occupying and using a ghetto in order to hold these people in. But they were completely innocent. And the Palestinians, just out the blue, attacked them. Everything started on October 7th. And even when they talk about the progression of the conflict, they would say, well, Israel has a deal. And people would be like, what do you mean Israel has a deal? Netanyahu just said that's not true. Why would Israel be against his own deal? And even now, when they talk about like Sinwar, the death, Blinken, Matthew Miller, that slimy degenerate, came out and said something like, "Well, Israel wanted a deal. Um, Hezbollah and Hamas never wanted a deal. They would never accept a deal." Keep in mind, Netanyahu murdered the lead negotiator in Tehran. Netanyahu killed Nasrallah when it was understood at some point that Nasrallah was open to accepting a deal. The US, France, and these other countries lied to Iran, which was part of the reason that Iran didn't even strike, because they thought, okay, well, they're going to be able to get a deal, and so I don't necessarily have to strike them because they're going to be able to get a deal. Okay, well, that even shown itself to be false and a lie. He felt like he was just basically used and taken advantage of. Like, they talk about this stuff in these warped, contrived ways in order to, let's say, advance a particular narrative to protect Israel. The problem with that line of thinking is that when Israel does something, like attack Iran, they're not going to hold Israel responsible. They're going to immediately say Iran shouldn't attack, Iran shouldn't respond, Iran shouldn't have did so and so, as opposed to get your dog back on the leash. Like, it is bizarre. And I want to play this clip for you because I want to get your take. Does Blinken have any credibility at all in the Middle East, or for that matter, does the U.S. have any credibility at all in the Middle East?
Short answer.
But just no. Just absolutely no. I want to play this clip. This is Anthony Blinken, and this is him wasting his time, getting nothing accomplished, as he has done for the past year, and basically bullshitting the public.
Since October 7th a year ago, achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed a bunch of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. This has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really two things left to do: get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow. And that's what we've been working on this past day, and will continue to work on throughout this trip. Even as all of this is happening, it's absolutely essential that humanitarian assistance get to the people who need it in Gaza. A couple of weeks ago, Secretary Austin and I wrote to the Defense Minister, Strategic Affairs Minister, with a list of things that need to happen in order for assistance to get more effectively to people who need that assistance. So we went over that in some detail yesterday, and I can report that there's progress made, which is good, but more progress needs to be made. And most critically, it needs to be sustained.
I can't stand him. Like, in real, I cannot stand. He is one of the sleaziest. Him and Matthew Miller are one of the sleaziest people that they have in this administration. And truth of the matter is, like, we need to be very clear. Blinken is the one that lied about Israel starving the Palestinians. Lied to Congress, no less. Blinken, in this conversation, when he was over there talking to Netanyahu, the reporting is that he told Netanyahu, there is a perception that you are trying to starve the Palestinians out of the north. Netanyahu said, that's not true. And Blinken said, okay, well, can you come out and say that? Can you basically make the case that you're not really doing that? And they basically told him no. They told him no. So when he's sitting here saying, well, we believe that there was progress that was being made and everything else, he's not telling the truth. He's lying, correct?
Completely. Like, at this point, the only thing that Anthony Blinken is getting out of his trips, I would imagine, is, like a boost of his frequent travel miles, I guess, because they're so completely useless. They're so completely meaningless. This thing that begging Netanyahu, to be like, can you publicly say you're not ethnically cleansing the north of Gaza? Could you just make a comment so that what we're seeing with our own eyes, you deny it? because it's like, but it doesn't seem like they even care anymore, because you had Matthew Miller a few days ago telling the press that Israel has the right to target civilians. This is the narrative that you're saying. This is really just at this point, eh,
I
no,
was,
no,
there
go
was a lag.
ahead.
I'm sorry. Please finish
Go
your
ahead,
point.
go ahead.
Well, I was just
Nothing
gonna.
that I think the Palestinians are under. Let me just finish quickly.
Yeah.
I think the Palestinians sadly are kind of on their own at this point. I mean, this Holocaust that is happening in the north of Gaza in particular, there's really no help coming.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of one of the reasons why they want to shift the narrative so much.
I mean, but I don't know how they would shift. I don't know how they would go about shifting that narrative. I mean, the reality of it is, we're seeing with our own eyes Israel level apartment buildings, level hospitals. I mean, you pointed out that they was like, Hezbollah has all of this gold and everything else in the hospital. The BBC did an investigation, went through caskets, went through medical waste. They found nothing, meaning they are making similar arguments in Lebanon that they were making in Gaza in order to do the same sort of wanton destruction and killing and murder that they were doing there. And it kills me that the rest of the world sits there with their hands in their ass. Like, meaning they are watching a large group of people just get slaughtered, just absolutely get slaughtered. They are not fighting militaries, by the way, meaning they're using airplanes, they're using tanks against groups. Hamas is a ragtag organization living on a shoestring budget to fight back as resistance. They have no capability in the sense of a military. They're just resistance. Hezbollah is not a formal military either, meaning the only formal military that they're fighting with is Iran. And the moment that they strike Iran, they're going to get their clock clean. Give me your take on that, by the way. I don't think I had the opportunity to talk to you about it. It is clear as day that Israel is vulnerable, meaning when Iran did their, let's say, test fire, their example, they're showcasing their capability. It was very clear that Iran had the capability of hitting Israel and that Israel couldn't do anything about it. Not to mention running low on missiles, and even the missiles they had couldn't stop the hypersonic missiles they were hitting. So Israel is going into an attack knowing full well that Iran can launch a very lethal, overwhelming strike that their air defense cannot really do anything about. So, what is the thinking here? Is the thinking A, we're going to get the United States involved because we're going to get in over our heads, or B, we are trying to create a pretext to use a nuclear weapon, meaning we're going to absorb an overwhelming attack and then say this is our casus belli to operate nukes? What is your thought on this? Because either way you look at it, the U.S. can't protect Israel from getting hit.
No, it can't. And I think Israel is really willing, just look at the way they've treated their captives in Gaza, right? Like not even lifting a finger to try to get them out, really. More likely than not killing them themselves with these indiscriminate attacks. So when you consider that and you extrapolate it to the entirety of the country with like the approach of this government, you see like this government is willing to let its people die, as many as it may need in order to achieve exactly the goals you're talking about. I think, at this point in particular, this genocide, it can no longer be just described as an Israeli genocide. At this point, this is a US genocide, it's a UK, it's a British and a German genocide as well. So in that regard, the question of like, oh, Israel wants to drag the US into this, the US has been, happily dragged for a while now. At this point, they don't really need much more reason, right? Like, I guess like send troops on the ground, but then like when you need to consider something that they talk now, Kamala Harris and I guess Donald Trump as well. I haven't been keeping up too much with the electoral circles in the US, but there's this narrative going on over there that I have noticed that Iran is now like the biggest threat, right? Like they are the threat to the US and they are the threat to the world. Iran is literally on the other side of the world, first of all. Second of all, Iran, as far as UN inspectors know and the rest of us know, has no nuclear weapons. Third, Iran is powerful internally and on a long range basis. That meaning what? Meaning that Iran has no capabilities to send troops, like the US. Iran has no bases like around the world. They cannot just like start deploying troops.
Well, I'll give you another one. How many countries have Iran invaded?
No, none.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, and again, like, okay, maybe like the narrative when you when you bring up reality is like, oh, you're on Iran apologies, or this is Russian disinformation or whatever. It's not. It's simply facts. It's factual, right? Israel has an air force. Iran doesn't. Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't. Israel has the backing of the US and all of their bases and all of their ships that are here in the region and all of their submarines. Iran doesn't. Do you honestly see Russia or China coming into fight in the name of Iran? I don't see it. I don't see it at all.
I mean, but here's the thing, though.
I see them giving them, like some sort of support, but not actually coming in and being like, we're gonna fight side by side with our Iranian brothers. I think they would take like a very, very, like, I don't know, shift in the dynamics of geopolitics in general, or like a very big event for this to happen. But then, like, when you look at Israel, it's the complete opposite. Like you have all of this willingness to protect it and to. And the reality, Jamal, is that the reason is because this is existential. This is not just existential for Israel; it's existential for the entirety of the U.S.-led world order, right? It is like Israel, in many ways, is kind of like the last fully, Western colonial outpost that needs to be protected, right? Like there's other, obviously, in Latin America, in Africa, etc., but they're not Israel, right? They're not what Israel is. They're not a colonial state based on apartheid and based on on land theft, right? On like sending your settlers and taking this land. Israel is it. So you need to look at it from like all of these angles, and I do think that if Israel goes down, the U.S. goes down. There's never gonna be a possibility, especially unless again there's a massive shift internally in the United States, that for the U.S. to be like I'm gonna cut my losses and let Israel sink. It's not gonna happen.
So, okay, no, that's interesting. I don't see, from my point of view, I'm an American, right? I'm not an Israeli. I don't necessarily care what happens to Israel, especially in the context of my own living situation. It's its own country. It, if it wants to pick fights with countries around it, then it should deal with it on its own. It shouldn't need us to get involved and give it a blank check to do so. I say that to say, yeah, you're right. It's a settler colonial state and it's doing what settler colonial states do. In fact, it's basically America, if you think about it, just not with the religious bit. America went into, yeah, we got to the country, we expanded, we killed all the Native American population, we put them in reservations, and we celebrate it as Thanksgiving. And I would imagine that part of what Netanyahu is thinking is of himself in a historical context. I'm going to create greater Israel. I'm going to be the one who's remembered for expanding the borders of Israel into Lebanon, into Syria, etc. Like, yeah, it's messianic in many respects. It's deranged. He's basically using October 7th as a way of gaining more territory for Israel. It's astonishing when you think about it because of the potential for what he could do for the world economy. I mean, they can basically take down the world economy, or at the very least in the context of oil and gas and how that stuff gets distributed around the world, based purely on this maniac in Israel. It's astonishing that the U.S. is allowing that to take place. Tell me something else. What is taking place on the ground in Lebanon? Meaning, how is it accommodating the bombings, the killings? These bombings are taking place in mass, in broad daylight in some cases, at night in some cases. They're leveling apartment buildings, like literally leveling apartment buildings. How is the infrastructure of Lebanon, let's say the services, the public services of Lebanon, dealing with that level of chaos and damage?
I'm going to give you an example. A few months ago, Israel, there was an image of the north of Israel in the dark, and the south of Lebanon had like lights. And people were saying, for the first time, this is what's happening in Israel. They are so, easily. They hate, they hate that Lebanon, has like, I don't know, like these things or whatever. And they said, the military said, oh, we're gonna make sure during the first day of the war, we're gonna bomb all of Lebanon's electric plants. And people here were like, our electric plants don't work. Our electric plants haven't worked for like 6 years at this point. Everything runs on generators. So with like basic services here in Lebanon, you don't need a war for them not to work. Like the people here have already found ways around it, right? So that's one side of the answer to your question. The other side is hospitals are still working. Thankfully, Lebanon is receiving some level of humanitarian aid. The airport is still functioning. You must see the images, right? Like planes flying in and out and the bombs going off, because where they're bombing is essentially next to the airport, where they're leveling these residential buildings in Beirut. Most of them are right next to the airport. People are still going to work. Actually, now traffic is worse, because what has happened is that you have over 1 million people that have been displaced from the south, finding places anywhere else, right? Like all government shelters are full. Non-official shelters are also full. All hotels are booked. In Beirut, people are in the corniche, in the boulevards. They're sleeping on the street. They're sleeping in parks. Right now, the weather is changing. Thankfully, here in this region and here in Lebanon in particular, summer kind of lasts until like November. But now it's starting to change. Now you start to feel it, right? Like now you need to take a jacket outside at night. So it's gonna get worse, right? It's gonna get worse, and this is what Israel is counting on. It's not just counting data here in Lebanon; it's counting in Gaza as well. For like more people to just die off. So far, Lebanon has managed, but I think it really is because Lebanon is a country that is used to managing crisis, that is used to when the port explosion happened and Beirut was almost completely destroyed, just like wiped off the face of the earth. It was the people, it was the residents of Beirut and of other cities that came down. They came later, but the first day it was the people who had. So this is kind of how it is. This is kind of how it is here in Lebanon, and I think this is something that a settler colonial state like Israel is just simply never going to understand, or the US or Germany. They are never going to understand that connection to your land, to your family, to your roots, because they don't have it. It doesn't exist. But the Lebanese do. So, like I said earlier, the situation is likely going to get worse, and is likely, I wouldn't put anything past the realm of possibility. But so far, the country is holding on because it's a country that knows how to hold on.
Explain something to the audience for me, because Lebanon is put together in a very weird way. Like it's not, the government is set up in sectarian factions, right? How did that come about? Like how did that organization and arrangement get created? Because it's such an odd way to organize a government, and why haven't they done anything to change it, to make it more, I don't know, functional? It may be the word.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lebanon is born out of a French colony, right? It was a French colonial state. Before that, it was under the Ottoman Empire. Lebanon as a country, as the Republic of Lebanon, is born, I think, in 1948, the same year as the Nakba, and with a constitution drafted by the French. And it's a constitution drafted by the French that is literally meant to keep these divisions alive, right? Like,
Oh wait, so the French set this up. Just to be clear, they set up this level of, wow.
said earlier about like the Lebanese people is still true, but they're also very mistrustful of each other in sectarian lines, right? Like the Christians are very, they don't trust the Muslims too much, and the Muslims kind of like also don't trust between themselves too much. There's always like a bit of a divide, not that's why you had civil wars here, right? You had like a very bloody civil war. That doesn't mean that, people don't get along or anything like that. No, it's just like it's a is set up like that by dividing the power alongside the three main religious sects, which is the Christian Maronites, the Shiite Muslims, and the Sunni Muslims. So you have, for example, the president of the republic can only be a Christian Maronite. The speaker of parliament can only be a Shiite, and the prime minister can only be a Sunni. So this is how, like this country functions. And this is also why, when you ask me, like, how are the services and stuff working, that Lebanon really relies more on their own sects, on their own, like a little where they live, their neighborhoods, their village, their towns. Whoever is the Mukhtar. The Mukhtar is like a mayor, it's like the head of these villages. And then like everything goes down from there, right? The central government, they print the money. I think they're in charge. They're supposed to be in charge of electricity. They are supposed to be in charge of running water. They're in charge, I think, of the garbage collection and like other things, like of the army, etc. But it's not like it's never been a strong government. It's never been a government, that you can rely on, really. Like even the hospitals, they rely a lot more like on the Red Cross, or they rely a lot more like on the religious leaderships, etc. Right? Like this is how it functions. So politically, this is how it's divided. This is how it's always been divided since Lebanon was founded as a republic, and it's also one of the reasons why the West, like I said, they can just pull at one of the strings, and in general, their allies are mainly among the Christian Maronites. The Christian Maronites are closer to the West. The Sunnis are closer to the Gulf, and by proxy to the West. And the Shiites, who have been like historically kind of like left behind, have Iran and have Hezbollah. Because before Iran or Hezbollah, in reality, the Shiites had nothing. Now, this is why Hezbollah has such a large representation. And this is why also, they can be so easily made into the bad guy, into the evil, into the other, right? And especially for the West, right? Because sadly, in the West, and particularly in the United States, the understanding of foreign countries, it hardly ever exists, right? So when you have a country as complicated as Lebanon, it's just as easy as saying Hezbollah bad, Israel good.
Esteban, man, thank you for this. I know there was a bit of trouble trying to get you on, but we got you on. This is definitely what I wanted to go into. It's somewhat confusing to me, only because, like, it's one thing for a country to be united and somebody to make an offer to a country. We want you to do this, or this is the deal that we're putting on the table. It's another thing to offer a deal to a country when the military of that country is not engaged. So it's like, okay, we're going to offer you a deal. But again, the Lebanese government hasn't fired a shot at Israel at all. So you are fighting Hezbollah, but you're making a deal with the government. It just seems very bizarre in the way that it's operating. But we'll see how it goes. Esteban Carrillo, Beirut based Ecuadorian journalist. Esteban, where can people find you, by the way?
Well, they can find me on Next as Esteban Carlo. They can find me at the Cradle Media. My work mainly there in their channels, and yeah, whenever we can get together, Jamal, is always a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate it. You have definitely informed me on this. And look, my heart goes out to you. Every time I see you, I always ask you, are you safe? Um, I don't say that flippantly. I actually want you to continue to be safe and healthy. Elijah Magdier, he said he was going to Lebanon in order to cover it. He's a veteran war correspondent, and he's covered these wars for years. My heart goes out to you guys, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You have a good one. Bye bye. All right. I am going to let Esteban go. And let's flip back to the main screen and do it that way.